Hey there. Welcome to another night of crushing historical reality. Tonight, you're not a noble, not a knight, not a romantic poet gazing out of a candlelit tower. You're just you, dropped, shoeless and confused, into the daily hellscape of medieval France. So before we crawl out from under a lice-infested blanket and get slapped in the face by the 13th century, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more historically grounded despair, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and how soft your mattress is, because after this you'll never complain about it again. Now dim the lights, maybe hug a pillow while you still have one, and let's wake up together in the most uncomfortable century imaginable. You wake up before sunrise because time does not belong to you. It belongs to the chickens, the cold, and the chronic inflammation that has permanently taken up residence in your lower back. You did not sleep in a bed. You slept in a pile of straw shaped vaguely like a coffin, and smelling worse than sin. The straw is old. It is full of fleas. It crunches when you move, not from dryness, but because something in it is still alive. Your pillow, if you had one, was a bundled tunic. If you didn't, it was your arm. Either way, your neck has given up hope. You share your sleeping space with others. Spouse, children, maybe a grandparent or a cousin, all tangled together under one damp wool blanket that was woven by someone long dead and never washed since. The fire died hours ago. The temperature inside the room matches the temperature outside, and your breath fogs the air with every exhale. Your feet are numb. Your fingers burn when they move. You pull your cloak tighter, but it's as full of holes as the moral fabric of your landlord. The house groans like it too, regrets surviving the night. The wind whistles through the thatch. You hear scratching from the rafters, probably rats, possibly demons. The air stinks of wood smoke, sweat, piss, boiled cabbage, and something worse you stopped identifying 3 winters ago. A child whimpers beside you, someone else coughs, loudly, wetly, repeatedly. You briefly wonder if they've died, and whether that would be quieter. You rise slowly, as if your bones have to renegotiate their contract with gravity. Your knees pop, your spine crackles, your hip screams. You stand anyway. The floor is packed earth, uneven and cold. It is sometimes covered in straw, more often in mud, chicken droppings, and the faint spiritual residue of despair. You fumble toward the fire pit. The embers are mostly dead. You blow on them. Nothing happens. You try again. A spark. You add twigs, you pray, you curse. Eventually it smoulders, like your attitude toward this century. There is no mirror. You do not need one. You already know what you look like. Tired, grey, crusted with yesterday's dust and tomorrow's regret. You splash your face with water from a wooden bowl that someone remembered to fill the night before. It's nearly frozen. It bites your skin, jolts your heart, and leaves you feeling slightly more alive and slightly less willing to continue living. There is no morning routine, no coffee, no hygiene. You scratch, you spit, you curse your existence quietly, so the children don't hear. Then you start the day, because if you don't, the chickens will starve, the bread won't bake, and your lord will remind you that your suffering is legally required. You survived the night, which is more than can be said for the rat near the hearth. That's breakfast sorted, if you're quick. In medieval France, waking up is not a relief. It's a confirmation that you're still trapped in a century where comfort is treason, rest is weakness, and the closest thing you have to self-care is shaking the lice out of your blanket and pretending not to cry. Welcome to the 13th century. You're going to hate every hour of it. Your home is not a sanctuary. It is a box of splinters and misery barely masquerading as shelter. The walls are made of wattle and daub, which is to say sticks, mud, straw, and a level of hope unsupported by any known engineering. Cracks form in the plaster every season. Mice widen them. Water finishes the job. The structure creaks with every breeze and sways with every sigh. You don't fix it. You apologize to it and pray it doesn't fall over this week. When it rains, the walls weep with you. When it's cold, they offer all the insulation of a damp tunic nailed to a barn door. They are not walls. They are loose suggestions of walls, held together by spit, soot, and medieval optimism. The roof is thatch. Not charming, not picturesque, just decaying vegetation layered over rotten beams that may or may not have termites. It leaks. It always leaks. When it doesn't leak, you assume it's planning something. Birds live in it. Insects fall from it. Rats chew their way through it to steal your stored grain and sometimes your dignity. In the best case scenario, the roof collapses slowly. In the worst, it burns, taking everything with it, including the neighbour's goat and any chance of a quiet evening. The floor is earth, not natural or rustic, just literal dirt compacted by generations of feet and soaked with everything. Spilled soup, chamber pot drippings, blood from when you butchered the chicken, and mud that comes in and never goes out. You throw straw on it when you can. That helps until it decomposes or catches fire. You sleep on it. You eat on it. You birth children on it. You die on it. And when you're buried, it's the same dirt, just rearranged slightly. There are no windows, only holes, covered with rags if you're lucky, pigs' bladders if you're creative, and nothing if the wind got there first. They do not keep the cold out. They let it in, along with flies, smoke, gossip, curses, and the occasional small bird. Light filters through these gaps when the sun permits, which is rarely. More often, you live in a permanent state of twilight, lit by a fire that refuses to start and a candle stub you've used for 3 years and will pass on to your children. Furniture is minimal, a bench, a table if someone didn't need the wood, a chest that holds everything, clothes, bread, secrets, the occasional mouse. The bed is straw, sometimes layered over old cloth, sometimes just a heap in the corner. You sleep in it fully clothed, wrapped in a wool cloak that smells like wet sheep and failure. You share this space with everyone: spouse, children, in-laws, livestock. Privacy is a myth. You urinate in a pot and dump it in the street. You do not own a towel. You dry your hands on your tunic or your dog or the person standing next to you. No one complains. They do the same. The house is always smoky. The hearth is central, unvented and full of ambition but no draught. The smoke gathers near the ceiling, then descends like divine punishment. Your eyes sting constantly. Your lungs rattle. The children cough like they're already dead. You don't clean the soot off the walls, as it's the only thing holding them together. You breathe ash. You eat ash. You're ash in the making. In medieval France, your home does not protect you. It merely contains your suffering. It is a damp coffin you walk through, a roofed apology to the concept of shelter. You do not decorate. You do not upgrade. You survive. You patch holes with cloth, fill gaps with dung, and pray it holds through the night. And if it doesn't, at least the weather will kill you faster than your neighbours do. There is no gentle beginning to your day. No stretch, no yawn, no mug of something warm in a sunlit kitchen. There is the fire, or more precisely, the lack of it. You crouch before the cold ashes of yesterday's efforts, poking the blackened logs with a stick, a prayer, and the full weight of your seasonal depression. If you're lucky, an ember glows. If not, you restart the process with flint, steel, and curses that would make the Virgin blush. You blow until your face is hot and your fingers are numb. Smoke assaults your lungs like a bandit. Your eyes water and your lips crack. If the fire catches, you thank whatever saint has jurisdiction over your hearth. If it doesn't, you whisper to the devil, just in case he's more efficient. Water is next. Cold, stagnant, metal-tasting water fetched yesterday from the village well or the river, depending on how many pigs drowned upstream. It sits in a wooden bucket by the door, gathering dust, flies, and memories. You splash some on your face. It does not refresh. It punches. You feel your skin recoil. There is no soap. You rub your eyes with your sleeve and call it clean. If you're especially devout or especially dirty, you might rinse your armpits with a rag soaked in vinegar and denial. No one notices. Everyone stinks. Your teeth are not brushed. They are ignored, punished, or, if one is causing particular agony, yanked with pliers warmed in the fire. You chew on a twig if you're fancy, or rinse your mouth with wine if you're lucky. Your breath smells like fermented oats and dread. You spit into the hearth, wipe your mouth with your hand, and continue pretending that hygiene is for the afterlife. The chamber pot is full. You forgot to empty it last night. Now it's your first burden of the morning, a sloshing ceramic bowl of shame and bodily betrayal. You carry it out with both hands, avoiding eye contact with your neighbours and with God. The street outside is lined with yesterday's waste, steaming slightly if the morning is cold enough. You add yours to the mix and whisper an apology to the earth that will never forgive you. The animals cry out, impatient, loud, entitled. The pig wants food, the chickens want freedom. The cow wants milking. You step into your shoes, which are damp. They are always damp. You do not know why. You assume the damp is now part of you. You shuffle into the yard, kicking at frozen mud, stepping over the dead mouse the cat deposited as a gift you neither wanted nor deserved. The animals stare as if they've been waiting for you since midnight, judging you for your laziness, your smell, and your life choices. You apologize, out loud. They do not forgive. You feed them with frozen fingers and dull movements. You milk by instinct, by memory, by resignation. Your body aches already. The day has barely started, and your shoulders burn like you've ploughed a field. You sigh into the cold. No one hears. No one answers. Everyone is too busy surviving their own version of this. You return inside to the same smell, the same mess, the same bowl of water and rag that pretends to be a wash basin. You tend to the children if they're crying. You tend to the fire if it's dying. You tend to yourself last, and even then, only enough to keep your body functional and your soul partially intact. There is no breakfast yet, no break, no warmth. Just the ritual of starting the day in a world that does not want you awake. In medieval France, the morning is not a beginning. It is a continuation of the previous misery under slightly better lighting. You rise, not because you've rested, but because rest is a sin and sleep is a thief. You scrape yourself together from the ashes and filth and you go on, because stopping would make sense and nothing here ever does. Breakfast in medieval France is not a meal. It's a necessity dragged from the jaws of starvation, with whatever is left from yesterday's disappointment. There is no feast, no eggs, no fruit, no smell of coffee. There is only bread. Always bread. And even that's a stretch. You reach for a loaf that was hard 2 days ago and has now achieved geological permanence. You chip off a piece with a knife that doubles as a farming tool and a weapon. The crust splinters. The inside is grey, dense, and has the texture of boiled bark. It tastes like dust, labour, and medieval sorrow. You soak the bread in ale. Not because you're decadent, because it's the only way to chew without breaking a tooth you cannot afford to lose. The ale is thin, weak, and slightly sour, brewed not for pleasure, but because water is what kills you. It's been sitting in a wooden jug by the hearth, shared by everyone and filtered through faith, not logic. Children drink it. Elders drink it. You drink it, hoping it dulls the memory of chewing through something that may have been a pebble or just a very committed grain. Sometimes there is cheese. It is not creamy. It is not soft. It is a hardened wedge of coagulated survival, salted until the inside of your mouth blisters and stored for so long it could be considered an ancestor. You shave off a slice if you can. If you can't, you gnaw it like a starving rodent and pretend it's indulgent. If a neighbour has an onion, or you've caught a snail, congratulations. Your meal now has texture, not flavour, just more decisions. There is no table setting. You sit where there is space. A stool, a step, the floor. You eat with your hands. Everyone does. A cloth may pass as a napkin, but it was also used to carry firewood, wipe a child's face, and clean out a pot. You ignore that. You have to. There are no plates. A bowl if you're lucky, a shared slab of wood if you're not. There are no individual servings. Everyone eats from the same dish, with fingers or with splintered spoons passed down like relics. Conversation is minimal. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else mutters about the pig escaping again. No one makes jokes. You're all too hungry. If the children fight over food, they're scolded. Not for rudeness, but for drawing attention to scarcity. If someone eats too fast, they're told to slow down. Not out of manners, but because vomiting means wasting calories you can't afford to lose. You chew slowly, not because you're savouring, but because each bite is work. The fire spits, the light shifts. You glance at the door, already thinking about the fields, the tools, the road, the weight. You finish your meal still hungry. That's normal. Satisfaction is a luxury. Fullness is suspicious. You don't complain. Complaints are for people with options. In medieval France, breakfast is not comfort. It's not joy. It's bread, beer, and the silent contract between your stomach and your future. That you'll keep going, even though everything you just ate tasted like ashes and anxiety. There is no morning boost, no energy surge. There is only a slow, grinding acceptance that this is what passes for nourishment, and it will have to be enough. Because lunch isn't coming for a long time, and hope, like fresh bread, is for the rich. You don't have a job, you have a sentence. Work in medieval France is not something you choose or enjoy. It's something that consumes you, body first and soul second. It begins before the sun rises and ends when your fingers no longer obey your brain. There are no weekends, no holidays except the ones enforced by God, and even then, you're expected to keep moving in secret. Your life is labour. Endless, aching, back-warping, finger-mangling labour, and it never gets easier, just heavier. If you're a peasant, you farm, not in the romantic sense. You don't frolic among golden fields. You claw at the soil with tools older than your grandmother, dragging a wooden plough that hates you more than your landlord does. The earth is either frozen like stone or soggy like stew, and both fight back. You dig, haul, plant, reap, and bleed into the ground that barely tolerates your existence. You grow wheat, rye, barley, not to eat, but to give away as tax. The best part goes to the Lord, the rest goes to God. What's left goes to rats, then you, in that order. If you're a man, your hands are calloused into something between bark and stone. Your fingernails are blackened. Your knuckles crack every time you move. You carry firewood, muck out the animals, fix the fence with rope and cursing, and pray the pig doesn't die, because that's your winter meat and your summer hope. If you're a woman, you do the same, plus everything else. You cook, clean, spin, mend, nurse, and raise children who may not make it to harvest. You wash your family's clothes with lye that burns your fingers and hang them over bushes to dry next to the neighbour's underpants and last week's sermon scroll. If you're a craftsman, you make things no one wants to pay for. Shoes that fall apart, tools that rust faster than they sharpen, pots that crack before they're cool. You compete with everyone, undercut yourself, work longer, sleep less. One bad week, one spoiled batch, and you're begging in the square with your dignity rolled up in a sack. If you're in a guild, you pay dues. If you're not, you pay bribes. Either way, you're always losing. If you're lucky enough to have a trade, carpenter, blacksmith, tanner, congratulations. You now get to inhale sawdust, smoke or boiling urine for 16 hours a day, while ruining your joints and developing a distinctive odour that will haunt every room you enter for the rest of your life. If you're a day labourer, you wait in a freezing square hoping someone needs something heavy lifted, or something dangerous done. You get paid in coin, bread, or promises, usually promises. There are no breaks, no shade, no gloves, no shoes that don't betray you in the rain. You sweat through wool, you ache beneath it, you burn in summer, you freeze in winter, your knees crunch, your shoulders grind, and your back develops a permanent question mark. You are 25 and feel 70. You're 40 and already dead in parts you don't talk about. You bleed, you limp, you bite down and keep moving. Work in medieval France is not about progress. It is not about pride. It is the act of resisting death 1 hour at a time while handing the fruits of your labour to someone who will never learn your name. You work because not working means starving. You work because starving means death. You work because death, while tempting, is not yet permitted by your obligations. You work, you suffer, you continue. Because in this world, survival is the only measure of success. And even that doesn't last long. If you think women in medieval France had it easier because they stayed at home, you've clearly never stayed in a 13th century home while trying to make cheese, deliver a baby and scrub pig dung off a child who thought mud was soup. There is no such thing as rest. There is no such thing as division of labour. There is only the unending, bone-crushing, teeth-gritting list of tasks that must be done while bleeding, sweating, limping, and being reminded that God made you second and slightly worse on purpose. You wake first, not because you want to, but because the bread won't bake itself and the men won't stop whining if there's no porridge. You stoke the fire, not with kindling, but with the memory of last night's scolding and whatever twigs the children didn't eat for fun. You grind grain with a stone that hates you. Your wrists ache, your fingers blister. You stir a pot of something beige until it resembles food, and hope no one notices the mouse hair. Then you serve it to people who mutter that it tastes like boiled despair. You smile. That's your job too. You sweep the dirt floor, not clean, just less filthy. You dump the slop. You scald the linens if there's water. If there's not, you hang the clothes anyway and pray no one notices the blood. You spin wool until your fingertips crack and your back screams. You weave. You sew. You patch. You mend. You mend again when the boy tears it playing chase with the neighbour's goat. You haul water, carry firewood, trap lice, mash herbs, feed chickens, scrape pots, and still find time to look composed because if you look tired, someone will accuse you of being bitter, which of course you are. You are pregnant often. You're never ready. It's not an event, it's an inevitability. Your body is not your own. It belongs to the marriage, the field, the kitchen, and the will of God, who seems unusually interested in making sure you're always exhausted and leaking. You give birth squatting by the hearth, gripping a stool, screaming into straw while other women hold your legs and whisper prayers they don't believe. There is no midwife unless one lives nearby and isn't already dead. There is no medicine, only boiling water and screams. If you live, you thank the saints. If you don't, the baby goes to your sister and the bread still gets made. Childcare is a full-time job layered on top of your other full-time job, which is layered on top of livestock management, which is layered on top of being a wife, which is a separate form of unpaid suffering. You nurse while weaving. You stir soup with the child on your hip. You teach them not to drink lye, not to poke the fire, not to follow the rats into the stable. They do it anyway. You sigh. You clean. You start again. If they live, you're lucky. If they die, you bury them before dusk and start kneading the dough again before the grief can settle too deeply. You serve everyone, always. You eat last. If there's anything left, you sleep last. If the baby allows it, you wake first. If the night doesn't wake you earlier with cold, cramps, or dread, you are not praised. You are expected. If you complain, you are punished. If you excel, you are ignored. If you fail, you are blamed. And through all this, you must also be modest, pious, cheerful, fertile, quiet, and dry. Always dry. God help you if you cry. In medieval France, a woman's work is not valued, not visible, and never done. It is the invisible scaffolding of society, built from blood, flour, ash, spit, and repetition. You are the foundation everyone walks on, the fire everyone warms beside, and the hands that mend the world without ever being thanked. You work harder than anyone, and still, when you die, your gravestone will simply read, wife, as if that were all you ever did. In medieval France, religion is not a private affair. It is a structure, a shadow, a sentence that stretches over every breath you take and every mistake you haven't made yet. You don't believe, you comply. Faith is not personal, it is public, mandatory, and carefully watched. Your soul is not yours. It belongs to the church, and the church does not share. You pray because not praying is noticed. You confess because not confessing is remembered. You fast, kneel, chant, bow, and pay. Always pay, because salvation costs less than damnation, but only barely. The church bell rings. It always rings. It wakes you, interrupts you, chastises you, and reminds you you're already late for something holy. Mass is held in Latin, which you do not understand. You nod anyway. You mumble. You cross yourself and avoid the priest's gaze because he knows things, or at least claims he does. He knows if you skipped last Sunday. He knows if you worked on a feast day. He knows if your cow gave birth on a saint's anniversary, and whether you thank the right one. If you didn't, he might tell the bishop. If the bishop finds out, someone pays a fine. If you can't pay, maybe it's just penance, maybe it's lashes, maybe it's public shame, and a cold night in a wooden box with a hole in the top and your sins written on a board around your neck. The calendar is full of saints' days. You don't know who half of them are. They arrive with no warning and bring with them rituals, prohibitions, processions, and penalties. Today, you must not eat meat. Tomorrow, you must light a candle. The next day, you must stand in the square while the relic of St. Useless is paraded past your shivering body on a cart that smells like incense, old bones, and theological debt. You bow, you kneel, you pretend to care. No one ever tells you why. You tithe. 10% of your harvest, 10% of your earnings, 10% of your hope. It goes to the church, to maintain the building you sit in once a week, and to pay the man who reminds you that you are wretched. He lives slightly better than you. His house has a roof. His fire doesn't die every night. He drinks imported wine while you sip watered ale, and try not to envy a man who has no children, no wife, and no calluses on his hands, but who has the power to condemn your soul to eternal fire if your daughter misses her confirmation, or your wife forgets to cover her hair. There are confessions. You kneel. You whisper. You admit things you didn't do just to be thorough. You leave feeling dirtier than when you entered. There is penance. You walk barefoot to a shrine. You recite psalms until your tongue goes numb. You flagellate yourself with a strip of knotted rope while the village pretends not to enjoy the spectacle. If someone coughs during Mass, it's a demon. If someone gives birth during Lent, it's her fault for being conceived on a Thursday. If your crops fail, it's because of your sins, or your neighbours, or someone's dream involving a chicken and the moon. Religion is not about comfort. It is about control. It dictates what you eat, when you bathe, who you marry, and where you're buried. You cannot think outside its lines. You cannot speak against it. Heresy is not a debate. It's a sentence, often executed by fire, stone, or rope, while a crowd watches and thanks God it isn't them this time. Miracles are rare, punishments are not. In medieval France, God is everywhere, but his silence is deafening. The church speaks for him, and it speaks often. You obey not out of love, but because fear is cheaper than rebellion. You kiss the cross, you burn the witch, you bless the bread. You hope quietly that when your time comes, someone lights a candle in your name. Because if they forget, and they probably will, your soul might wander, and there are worse things than dying, like dying wrong. You have children. Of course you do. You're legally, religiously, and economically obligated to produce as many as your body can manage before it collapses. Children are your workforce, your legacy, your only retirement plan, and your punishment for surviving puberty. You don't have 2 or 3. You have as many as biology, poverty, and divine indifference allow. Most won't make it. That's just how the numbers work. You give birth to 10 so that 3 might outlive you, and even that's considered wildly optimistic. They are not quiet. They scream, they whine, they soil everything. They vomit into bowls you were using for porridge 5 minutes ago. They touch fire, mud, dead animals, and holy relics with equal curiosity. They don't sit still. They don't listen. They learn by breaking things, including themselves. You spend more time wiping their noses than your own face. When they're not crying, they're coughing. When they're not coughing, they're bleeding. When they're not bleeding, they're missing. You hope they come back. You also hope they don't bring lice. You don't baby them. You can't. Childhood is not a stage of life. It's a brief, dangerous hallway between birth and labour. By age 4, they're hauling water. By age 6, they're watching goats. By age 8, they're working beside you in the fields, dropping tools, miscounting beans, and asking questions about saints you barely remember. They carry wood, sweep floors, stir pots, scrub hides, and occasionally cry themselves to sleep when no one's watching. No one has time to comfort them. They get over it or they don't. Either way, breakfast still needs to be made. Education, if it exists, is religious, rigid, and mostly designed to make them fear hell more than they fear their parents. If you're lucky, a priest teaches them Latin they don't understand and morality they can't follow. Most children don't go to school. They go to work. The only literacy they develop is reading the weather and interpreting the tone of your voice when you shout from across the yard. Play exists, but not in the way you think. It's chasing pigs, throwing rocks at trees, and occasionally turning sticks into swords before someone gets hit too hard and cries until a tooth falls out. Toys are rocks. Dolls are sticks. Games end when someone bleeds or the sun goes down. Laughter happens, but so do accidents. Children die often, from fever, from falls, from goats, from nothing at all. You go to bed with 6 and wake up with 5, and you dig a hole and say a prayer and keep going because you have no choice. They are expensive. They eat more than they help. They tear clothes, lose tools, drop buckets, and forget to tie up the donkey. They ask for things you don't have. They want warmth, safety, attention, and all you can give them is a crust of bread and a blanket that smells like smoke and failure. And yet you love them, though you'd never say it. Not out loud. Not even to yourself. You love them through work, through chores, through the way you save the last scrap of cheese and let them think they earned it. In medieval France, children are not precious. They are provisional. They are loud, sticky extensions of your obligation to survive, to multiply, to endure. You protect them with everything you have, which is never enough. You pray for them constantly, knowing God might not be listening. You watch them grow like weeds in a broken field, strong, stubborn, wild, and sometimes gone by morning. And when one of them laughs, really laughs, you remember, for just a moment, why you keep waking up at all. There is no lunch break. There is only a brief interruption in your suffering long enough to shovel something vaguely edible into your mouth before your body collapses or your tools rust from the tears you pretend are just sweat. Lunch in medieval France is not a meal. It is a moment. A soggy, grey, flavourless moment served in a cracked bowl that has seen more tragedy than joy, passed around a table that isn't really a table, shared with people who look like they haven't smiled since the last good harvest, which, depending on the region, may have been mythical. You eat what you have, not what you want. And what you have is porridge, always porridge, a slop of boiled grain, barley, rye, millet, cooked until it's more glue than food, salted until your mouth dries, and thinned with water that may or may not have been fetched from the same bucket the pig drank from this morning. Sometimes you add peas, sometimes beans, sometimes bits of last week's cabbage. Most of the time, it's just mush. Grey, bland, steaming slightly if you're lucky, cold and congealed if you're not. It smells like defeat and tastes like boiled endurance. If you have fat, you're lucky. A smear of animal grease adds texture. It coats the tongue in a way that screams survival, while whispering cholera. If you have meat, actual meat, it's likely salted beyond recognition, stringy, chewy, and came from an animal that died reluctantly. Bones are boiled for broth, reused for soup, then carved into toys or tools or jewellery, depending on your level of desperation and imagination. The concept of spice is foreign. Pepper is for princes. Garlic, if you grow it, doubles as medicine and curse prevention. Most flavour comes from smoke, salt or thyme, the three ingredients always available, whether you like them or not. You eat outside if it's not raining. If it is, you eat inside, near the fire if it's lit, near the door if it's not. You crouch, you hunch, you sit on a stump or a pile of rags or your own foot. There are no chairs. The bench broke. The stool caught fire. The ground is reliable, cold, and only occasionally crawling with insects. You hold your bowl in one hand, your spoon, if you have one, in the other, and you alternate between chewing, swallowing, and pretending not to notice the smell of someone else's feet. Food is shared, always. No one gets their own plate. Children eat from your bowl. So do dogs. You eat fast, not because you're in a hurry, but because hesitation means loss. Someone will grab your portion if you blink too long. No one speaks. Conversation takes energy. Complaints take breath. Laughter feels suspicious. You stare into the bowl like it contains your future. It doesn't. It barely contains your present. If you're working in the field, lunch is eaten with hands still caked in dirt. If you're in the workshop, it's eaten on a plank of wood balanced between barrels. If you're on the road, it's chewed while walking, often washed down with a sip of ale that's been warming in a leather flask since sunrise. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve. You scrape the bowl with your fingers. You burp and pretend it means you're full. There is no dessert. There is no second course. There is no pause to reflect or give thanks beyond a mumbled line to a saint who hasn't answered anyone in decades. There is only clean-up. Licking the spoon, scraping the pot, chasing off the chickens who tried to steal the crust, and then returning to whatever task was breaking you before your stomach reminded you it still had rights. In medieval France, lunch is not a pleasure. It is a mercy, temporary, incomplete, barely enough. It keeps you standing, which is all it needs to do. You do not ask for more. You do not expect variety. You swallow what you're given and return to the field, the forge, the forest, the filth. Because hunger is waiting, always, and food is never far from being memory again. You are not free. Not in theory, not in practice, not even in dreams. Feudalism is not a system. It's a food chain, and you're not at the top. You're not even in the middle. You are the dirt clinging to the boots of the man who owns the land you till, the sheep you shear, and the air you breathe if he remembers to charge you for it. You do not own property. You are property, in all but name, and sometimes even in name, depending on what documents your lord has forged to remind you that your grandfather once borrowed a mule and thus condemned your bloodline to eternal servitude. The land you live on belongs to someone else. You work it, feed it, bleed into it, and bury your family in it, but you don't own a single clod. If the harvest is good, your lord smiles. If the harvest is bad, he frowns. Either way, you owe him 10 sacks of grain, 2 pigs, a hen, and a week of forced labour for his cousin's wedding, which you will not be invited to. You pay rent in food. You pay taxes in time. You pay tithes to the church. You pay bribes to the bailiff. And when you run out of things to pay with, you start giving away your children's labour. It is expected. It is normal. It is called duty. Your life is a loop of obligation. You owe your lord for protection, though you've never seen him hold a sword or step outside in weather worse than lightly cloudy. You owe your priest for salvation, though he seems to spend most of his time reminding you that heaven is reserved for the patient, the penitent, and the landowning. You owe your neighbours for silence, for keeping your secrets, for not turning you in when you mutter unkind things about the crown while stomping mud out of your shoes. Everyone owes someone, except the people at the top. They owe nothing, they receive. You do not rebel. Rebellion is suicide with paperwork. If you complain, you are lazy. If you resist, you are a criminal. If you run, you are hunted. The guards don't need a reason to beat you. Just the right mood and enough ale. Justice is not for your kind. It is administered in Latin and carved into stone by men who have never touched a plough. If your lord steals your only ox, you are reminded it was his ox all along. If you steal his goose, you are hanged. Fairness is for saints and songs. There are no elections. There are no councils. There are no debates. Decisions are made in castles and carried out in fields on backs like yours. You do not speak. You are spoken to. Your opinion is irrelevant unless it is shouted with enough other voices to become a problem, and problems are solved with soldiers and fire. You smile when told to. You bow when summoned. You kneel, not out of reverence, but because your knees have already collapsed under the weight of taxes and expectation. You know your place. It is low. Beneath the merchant, beneath the priest, beneath the squire who once spat in your soup and called it a blessing. You will die in this place. Your children will be born into it. If they are lucky, they might rise one notch higher, become a servant in a noble house, polish someone else's silver, carry someone else's chamber pot. They will call it an opportunity. You will pretend to be proud. In medieval France, feudalism is not a system of loyalty. It is a system of extraction, of hunger, dressed up in banners, of theft, baptized as law. You exist to serve, to yield, to kneel, to vanish into the mud so that someone else may feast in stone halls and call it divine order. And if you dare to ask why, the answer is simple. Because it has always been this way, and because someone richer than you said so. The law exists, not to protect you, but to remind you that you're always one bad mood away from being punished. In medieval France, justice is not blind. It sees very clearly who owns land, who owns coin, and who owns nothing but a tunic patched with regret. If you are poor, and you are, the law treats you the same way your lord treats a leaky roof, something to be fixed quickly, cheaply, and without remorse. You do not appeal, you do not explain, you accept. If you steal a loaf of bread, you are caught. Always. Even if no one sees you, someone accuses you because hunger is common and scapegoats are cheaper than solutions. The punishment depends on your lord's mood, the local priest's boredom, and whether your cousin insulted the bailiff last summer. You might be fined, which means you lose your tools. You might be branded, which means everyone avoids you while still expecting you to show up at mass. You might be flogged, tied to a post and whipped until your back looks like someone tried to till it with a broken plough. And if they're feeling theatrical, your ear comes off. That's not a metaphor. They cut it off, as a warning to others. It works. Trials are rare. Fair trials are mythical. If one happens, it unfolds like a badly rehearsed play, where the outcome is pre-written in the judge's ledger. You stand on a platform covered in dirt and confusion, while your accuser lists your sins. You can't read, you can't write, you can't even speak proper French if you're from the wrong village. The judge frowns, the clerk nods. Someone mutters something about divine justice, and then you're either fined, beaten, or dragged to a cell the size of a wine barrel. You spend 3 nights in darkness before someone remembers to tell your family you're not dead. Yet, the law does not apply equally. Nobles duel, peasants bleed. A noble who kills a man pays a fee. A peasant who insults a noble is hanged. If a lord's servant assaults your daughter, it's called mischief. If your daughter screams too loudly, she's accused of witchcraft. If your son speaks out of turn, he's whipped for insolence. If your wife looks too clever, she's watched. If you complain, you disappear. No one asks. Everyone nods. Fear keeps the peace. The keepers of order are not guardians. They are men with sticks and permission. The bailiff is fat, drunk, and armed. The watchmen are bored, bribbable, and too tired to chase thieves unless they stole from the church. If your home is robbed, you file no report. You curse, you pray, and you hope your neighbours pretend not to know who did it. If you are robbed by tax collectors, you thank them for not burning your house. You sign nothing. You understand nothing. The law is explained to you only when it's about to be used against you. There are public punishments. Everyone attends. Not for justice, for entertainment. A thief has his hands crushed with stones. A blasphemer is dragged through the mud behind a donkey. A woman accused of adultery stands barefoot in winter while people throw turnips. Children laugh. Adults watch silently. The priest says nothing, and you nod because this is how order is kept. This is how peace is maintained. Through spectacle, through terror, through the knowledge that you are always one mistake away from being the main event next week. In medieval France, the law is not a shield, it is a club. It swings downward, always. You obey not because it makes sense, but because questioning it makes enemies. You kneel when told. You speak when allowed. You bow to justice the way you bow to storms, not with respect, but with survival. And when you hear the bell ring and see the men with rope and torches, you don't ask what happened. You look at the ground and hope quietly that it isn't your turn. Yet, you do not fear death. You expect it. It sits beside you at every meal, sleeps at your feet, and waits outside your door in the form of a cough, a cut, or a chill breeze on a damp morning. You're not protected, you're not prepared, you're one sneeze away from the afterlife, and the only certainty about that is it will probably smell better than where you are now. Disease is not occasional, it is constant. It is the background noise of medieval France, a wheeze, a groan, a bubbling sore, a child who stops crying and never starts again. You're always sick, not dramatically, just persistently, vaguely, miserably unwell. Your joints ache, your stomach turns, your skin cracks, your gums bleed, your breath wheezes like a dying accordion. You don't know why, no one knows why. The priest says it's sin, the herbalist says it's imbalance, the barber says it's your fault for not being rich. Everyone agrees it will pass, or you will. Either way, you still have to milk the goat before sunset. The common cold can kill you. So can a splinter. So can a bad oat. You might wake up fine and be dead by nightfall. Fever takes children quickly. It takes adults slower, more cruelly, with sweating, shaking and long hallucinations where you beg for water and someone hands you a damp cloth soaked in vinegar and pity. Boils erupt. Teeth rot. Wounds fester. The air is thick with smoke and spores and the scent of something once alive now being carried away by flies. You try not to breathe too deeply. You try not to notice your neighbour hasn't opened his door in 2 days. You try not to think about the way your cousin started coughing and stopped speaking. There are no doctors. There are people with knives and confidence. They bleed you, burn you, rub you with herbs, or tell you to pray harder. Sometimes they chant. Sometimes they prescribe wine, or leeches, or both. You accept whatever they offer, because doing nothing is worse, and complaining gets you blamed for your own affliction. If you live, it's a miracle. If you die, it's a lesson. Either way, they move on. Funerals are brief. Graves are shallow. Prayers are mumbled. No one cries for long, because tears are for the living, and the living are busy. You wrap the dead in cloth, whisper their name, and cover them with dirt before the smell attracts attention. You burn herbs to mask the scent. You wash your hands if there's water. You cross yourself. You go back to work. Play comes in waves. Sometimes rats arrive first. Sometimes nothing does. Just fever, bleeding, swelling, silence. Entire villages empty in a week. Children are found alone, chewing on bark, calling for mothers who will never answer. The church rings the bells until the priest collapses. Then no one rings them at all. You lock your door. You stop answering knocks. You sleep with a knife under your blanket, though no one is coming to rob you. There's nothing left worth taking. You accept that your death is likely to be inconvenient. Not noble, not heroic, probably humiliating. You might die in a ditch, in the cold, in the mud, in the arms of someone who barely knows your name, or alone, with the fire gone out and the animals already chewing at the corners of your cloak. There is no dignity, only decay. And if you're lucky, someone will remember to mark the spot so no one steps on it too soon. In medieval France, death is not the end of life. It is part of life. It is expected, endured, ignored, and repeated. You live beside it. You sleep beside it. You teach your children to wave at it politely when it passes. And when it finally reaches out its hand, you take it without argument, because it's the only thing in your world that comes without taxes, permission, or delay. Your teeth are not your friends. They are ticking time bombs embedded in your skull, waiting to betray you at the worst possible moment with a crack, a rot, or an abscess that swells your face into a biblical cautionary tale. There is no prevention. There is no toothpaste, no floss, no mouthwash, no routine checkups. There is only pain. Creeping, throbbing, nerve-splitting pain that starts as a dull ache and ends with you begging someone, anyone, to do something. Even if that something involves pliers, alcohol and permanent damage. You start losing teeth young. By age 15, you've probably already yanked out your first molar with a piece of rope and a door frame. By 30, your smile looks like it's been through a small war. Blackened stumps, yellow fangs, gaps wide enough to whistle through. You chew on one side if you're lucky. You chew slowly. You chew fearfully. Every bite is a gamble. Bread can break you. A bone in the stew can end you. Hard cheese might be your undoing. If a tooth hurts, you do nothing. At first, you pray. You rinse with wine. You chew on mint if you can find any. You curse softly and pretend it's getting better. It never is. Eventually, when the pain spreads to your ear, your eye, your jaw, when your face begins to swell like bread left too long near the fire, you go see the only person qualified to help, the village barber. Because in medieval France, the man who cuts your hair also cuts your gums. He has a stool, a blade, and the confidence of someone who once removed a splinter without killing the patient. There is no anaesthesia. He pours you ale until you can't speak. Then he leans you back, plants a knee on your chest, and yanks. You scream. You bleed. He wipes the blood on his apron, spits, and offers to cauterize the wound with a hot iron, just in case. You nod. He grins. He holds the metal to your jaw until the room spins. Then he pours more ale and tells you not to eat solid food for 3 days, as if you were eating solid food to begin with. If infection sets in, and it will, you die. If it doesn't, you return home, victorious, minus 1 tooth and several ounces of dignity. There are no false teeth, no implants, no dental plates. If you lose too many, you mash your food into pulp with your gums or starve slowly while your family pretends not to notice. Kissing becomes complicated. Talking becomes slurred. Your face caves in. You age 20 years in 1 season. If you're rich, maybe you get a carved piece of bone jammed into the gap and held in place with thread. If you're not, you keep your mouth shut and hope people focus on your eyes instead. Children get no special treatment. They cry, they point, they drool blood, and then they're told to be brave while someone with bad breath and worse eyesight jabs a stick at the offending molar. They learn quickly not to complain. Pain is expected. Pain is educational. Pain builds character, which is good, because they'll have no teeth left to build anything else. In medieval France, dentistry is not a science. It is an act of desperation, a ritual of survival performed with tools that belong in a butcher's shed and hands that have never known precision. There are no clean instruments, no sterile gloves, just iron, heat, and the resolve to get through it without screaming too loud. Because in a village of 50, everyone hears everything, and no one wants to be remembered as the man who sobbed during a tooth pull. Not when death is cheaper, quieter, and comes with fewer witnesses. You do not marry for love. You marry for land, livestock, reputation, or because your parents said so, which means you marry because someone else needs a field harvested and a womb filled. Marriage is not the culmination of romance. It is the beginning of legally sanctioned exhaustion. It happens early. For women, as early as 12. For men, usually by 16. There is no courtship, no candlelit dinners, no shy glances across a meadow. There is a handshake, a dowry, and a priest who mutters through the ceremony like he has somewhere better to be. And he probably does. Once married, you belong to each other in the way buckets belong to wells. Functional, worn, and occasionally cracked beyond repair. The house is small, the bed smaller. Privacy is non-existent. Arguments are loud and unresolved. Affection is rare, usually accidental. If you touch your spouse, it's because you're handing them something or waking them up to say the goat escaped again. You do not whisper sweet things. You whisper threats about firewood and manure. You sleep beside someone who snores, sweats, and possibly resents you, and you wake up beside them for the next 40 years, unless death gives one of you an early exit. Children follow quickly, not because you want them, but because there's no stopping them. There is no contraception beyond hoping the saints are in a merciful mood, or that your partner is too tired from the harvest. Every year brings another pregnancy, another chance to die in childbirth, another mouth to feed, another reason to stay. You raise the children together, not as a team, but as co-defendants in a lifelong trial. You discipline, you scold, you try to teach them how to survive a world that does not want them, while secretly wondering whether they'll make it to adulthood or disappear into the same cold ground where half your siblings already sleep. Love may exist, somewhere, in brief moments, a shared laugh, a saved crust of bread, a hand held in silence during a funeral. But mostly there is duty, habit, familiarity. You know how they walk, how they cough, how they curse under their breath. You know the shape of their back when they bend over the fire and the sound of their boots when they stomp across the mud. You know them the way you know the smell of your house. Unpleasant, inescapable and oddly comforting. Family is a unit of survival, not sentiment. You live with your in-laws. You feed them, wash them, bury them. You take care of your siblings, your nieces, your elderly uncle who talks to ghosts and occasionally wanders into the woods. There is no choice. There is no break. If one falls, the rest carry more. If one dies, the others do not mourn for long. Someone has to milk the cow and collect eggs. You do not celebrate anniversaries. You do not write poems. You count the years in harvests and teeth lost. Divorce is not an option. Separation is scandal. Infidelity is common, whispered about, punished selectively. If a husband strays, he is bored. If a wife strays, she is a whore. Either way, the children keep coming, the chores continue, and the priest pretends not to notice. Marriage is permanent, not because it works, but because it's easier than starting over in a society where starting over means starvation and shame. You endure, you adapt. You hope the next generation finds it less unbearable. In medieval France, marriage is not about happiness. It is about holding on. Through cold winters, dead infants, broken tools, failed crops, and nights where no one speaks. You stay because you have to. Because leaving would make things worse. Because somewhere, deep beneath the fatigue and the fights, there is a flicker of something that almost feels like companionship. And in a world this hard, that's as close to love as anyone ever gets. Sex exists. It has to. That's how people are made, and in medieval France, people are made often, loudly, and without much discussion. But sex is not pleasure. It is not freedom. It is not adventure. It is obligation, fear, duty, and above all, sin. You're taught from childhood that your body is a trap and your urges are the rope. The church speaks of purity the way farmers speak of drought, with terror and familiarity. Lust is a crime. Desire is a weakness. Passion is a direct invitation to eternal damnation and worse, public judgment. You do not learn about sex in any structured way. There are no books, no talks, no friendly chats by the fire. You learn by accident. From animals, from rumours, from noises through thin walls. You piece it together like a broken cart. Wrong parts, missing pieces, strange sounds. You do not ask questions. Questions make people suspicious. If you ask too much, someone starts watching you in church. If you laugh at the wrong joke, you get whispered about in the market. Curiosity is dangerous. Ignorance is safe. When you marry, you're expected to fulfill your marital duties. That's the phrase. Not make love, not enjoy each other. Fulfill. Like paying a tax, like sweeping a floor. Sex happens at night, in silence, in the same room as your children, your parents, and occasionally the family goat. It is fast, awkward, and always under the invisible eye of a judgmental God. You do not experiment, you do not request, you do not explore, you perform, you endure, you try not to make noise, you try not to think, you try not to want. The church regulates your schedule. No sex on Sundays, or feast days, or fast days, or Lent, or Advent, or during menstruation, or after childbirth, or before communion. The list grows longer each year. Eventually you are allowed to touch your spouse on Tuesdays between the rooster's second crow and the sun's full rise, assuming neither of you has a headache, a hernia, or a theological crisis. If you deviate, you sin. If you sin, you confess. If you confess, you pay. If you don't pay, you suffer. If you enjoy it too much, you might be a heretic. Pleasure is dangerous, especially for women. A woman who wants sex is suspicious. A woman who talks about it is cursed. A woman who enjoys it is accused of witchcraft, of immorality, of being too warm-blooded, a phrase that sounds poetic but ends in exorcism. Men are allowed to stray, but not too openly. Women are never allowed. A single misstep and you're marked. Metaphorically if you're lucky, physically if you're not. Whispers spread. Stones fly. Ropes tighten. There is no birth control. None that works, at least. There are herbs, prayers, potions, superstitions. Most are unreliable. Some are fatal. Every encounter might result in a child. Every child is a risk. A mouth to feed. A body to bury. A soul to baptize and hope it doesn't die before the priest arrives. And still, sex happens. Quietly. Desperately. Sometimes kindly. Sometimes cruelly. It is a fact of life and a source of constant dread. You do not talk about it. You pretend it doesn't exist until it does with consequences. In medieval France, sex is not liberation. It is transaction, temptation, and trap. It is regulated by the pulpit, policed by the village, and soaked in shame. You do not flirt. You do not seduce. You survive. You suppress. You sin. And afterward you pray. Not because you feel guilty, but because someone told you that you should. And because it's easier than admitting you still want more. You are not clean. You have never been clean. You do not remember what clean is supposed to feel like, and if someone described it to you, you'd assume they were either mad, rich, or both. Hygiene in medieval France is not a ritual. It is a rumour, a dream shared by saints and occasionally referenced by priests as a metaphor for sin. Your body is a collection of odours, rashes, and particles older than your youngest child. You bathe rarely, reluctantly, and with water, you carry by hand in buckets that leak and slosh and attract flies like a holy relic attracts pilgrims. There is no soap, not real soap. There is a greyish lump of animal fat boiled with ashes and scraped onto a cloth if you're lucky, onto your bare hand if you're not. It burns, it smells, it doesn't lather. It makes you question whether you're dirtier before or after you use it. You scrub because you must, not because it helps. Your skin rebels. Your nails are permanently black. Your scalp is a battlefield of lice, scabs, and prayers. You itch constantly. Everyone does. It's not a problem, it's a condition. You do not bathe daily. You do not bathe weekly. You bathe when circumstances demand it. A religious holiday, a wedding, a death, or the arrival of someone important enough to notice the grease in your hair. You strip behind the barn, if there's privacy. You fill a tub, if one exists. More often, you dunk yourself in a river that smells like manure and tastes like mould. The water is cold, always cold. It bites, it punishes. It reminds you that warmth is a luxury for the living, and cleanliness is a threat to your immune system. Your clothes are never fresh. They are wool, linen, or coarse blends of both, worn until they disintegrate. You sleep in them, work in them, bleed in them. Washing is an ordeal. You boil a pot, add lye or crushed herbs, stir with a stick, then beat the fabric against a stone until the dirt gives up or the cloth tears. You hang them on bushes where goats chew the hems. You fold them stiff and sour-smelling and wear them again. Underwear exist in theory. In practice, you hope the inner layer of your tunic hasn't fused to your body yet. Hair care is optional and mostly spiritual. You cut it with shears. You brush it with a bone comb passed down through generations and home to a thriving colony of unnamed organisms. You oil it with animal fat if you want shine, or cover it with a hood if you want peace. Beards are for men. Long, wild, sacred. Shaving happens with a blade you also use for sharpening sticks and cutting cheese. Blood is a side effect. Infection is a tradition. Teeth are not brushed. They are wiped, scraped, ignored, or extracted. Breath smells like onions, old beer, and regret. Your mouth is a swamp of cavities and stories. Fingernails are short because they snap. Toenails are long because no one can see them in boots made of leather, straw, and the sound of squishing. You sweat constantly. You stink always. You hope others do too, so no one mentions it. In medieval France, hygiene is not self-care. It is a seasonal purge, a communal event, a sacrifice to the idea of human dignity. You're not clean. You're clean enough. You're not fragrant. You're survivable. You do not sparkle. You do not shine. You exist, and that's enough. Because the dirt on your skin is nothing compared to the filth in your water, your streets, your mouth, and your future. And at least the lice keep you company. Growing old in medieval France is not a reward. It is not wisdom, not reverence, not a time to rest and reflect on a life well lived. It is slow erosion, public inconvenience, and a daily reminder that your body was never designed to last past the age of usefulness. Most people don't get old. They die from childbirth, fever, famine, infection, accident, or someone else's stupidity long before grey hairs appear. If you live past 40, people start to look at you with suspicion. If you live past 50, they start asking if you're a witch. If you live past 60, you might as well be a relic, brittle, creaky, and slightly cursed. Your back bends. Your knees fail. Your fingers curl inwards, as if trying to grip something long lost. Your teeth are gone or dying. Your eyesight blurs. Your hearing fades. Your joints click when you breathe. You limp constantly. You groan involuntarily. Standing up is an event. Sitting down is a process. Lying down feels permanent, and getting back up again feels optional. Your bladder forgets its manners. Your bowels ignore all reasonable scheduling. You smell faintly of cabbage, ointment, and resignation. You're not respected. You're tolerated. You're helped if you're lucky, ignored if you're not. You become part of the background noise, mumbling, wheezing, occasionally shouting at the chickens because they're in your spot. The younger generation rolls their eyes when you speak, and you speak often. Not because you have wisdom, but because pain makes you loud. You tell stories no one asked for, repeat warnings no one hears, and mutter prayers no one believes in. People feed you out of guilt or obligation, not love. You try not to take up too much space. You always do. Work does not stop. Retirement is a fantasy invented centuries later by people who had money. You keep going until your limbs say otherwise. You spin wool, sort beans, shell peas, scare crows, repair tools, watch children, and remind people that plagues used to be worse. You carry things until you drop them. Then you carry smaller things. Then you sit by the fire and hold nothing but your own knees. No one thanks you. No one asks if you need anything. They assume you don't, because if you did, you would have died already. The village views you with a blend of pity and superstition. You're closer to the grave and therefore closer to the other side. You become a spiritual liability. If something goes wrong, a poor harvest, a sick child, a dead goat, someone might suggest that you gave the evil eye. You deny it. They nod. They still avoid you in the street. You're too slow to defend yourself and too tired to care. Your memories betray you. You forget names, places, years. You mix up grandchildren. You ask the same question 4 times. You laugh at the wrong moment. You weep at nothing. People sigh when you speak. You tell them you used to run through these fields. They do not believe you. You tell them you once danced until your feet bled. They pretend to smile. You sit back and let the silence win. In medieval France, old age is not golden. It is grey, cracked, and mostly ignored. It is not an honour. It is a sentence. You survive not because you were strong, but because death was busy, and when it comes for you at last, you don't fight it. You nod. You lie still. And you hope someone remembers to cover your feet before the rats arrive, because dignity is for the young, and you've run out of teeth to clench through the pain. When you die in medieval France, the first thing people feel is inconvenience. Not grief, not reflection. Just the dull thud of another obligation added to a week, already overflowing with frostbitten chores and existential dread. Death is common. Too common. It happens so frequently and with such repetitive detail that mourning becomes more of a routine than an emotion. You don't get a moment of silence. You get a few hours of logistical panic, a hole in the ground, and maybe a candle if your relatives remember. If they don't, you're still buried, just faster. There is no embalming, no makeup, no satin pillow under your head. There is a shroud if someone can spare the cloth, or just the same clothes you died in, soiled, torn and stiff from whatever finally shut your body down. Your body's not washed unless your widow insists, and even then it's a rinse at best. The smell is already there. People pretend not to notice. Flies do not pretend anything. The grave is shallow, always shallow, not from laziness but from necessity. The ground is hard, the tools are dull, and the men digging are tired and would rather be anywhere else. A priest is summoned if one is available. He arrives late, mutters Latin, forgets your name, then moves on to the next appointment. The service is short. The prayers are mumbled. The eulogy, if it happens, is a list of things you didn't steal and people you didn't hit. Someone crosses themselves. Someone else coughs. The dirt goes in fast, no one wants to linger. You're buried in the village plot if you're lucky. If not, in the field behind the barn or beneath the hedge where the pigs don't dig too deep. Your marker is a stone, or a stick, or nothing. Your name may be scratched on wood. It will rot within a year. People will forget the exact spot within a season. Within a decade, they'll forget you entirely. This is not cruelty. This is survival. Memory is expensive, and grief cannot interrupt the harvest. There is no feast unless someone wealthy dies. Then there is bread, ale, maybe a stew made from the animal they didn't name. For the poor, there is no food, no music, no black veils, only silence and a return to labour. Children ask where you went. They are told you sleep in the earth. They nod. They move on. Death is not mysterious. It is a chapter everyone has memorised by age 7 and expected to recite by adulthood. Your belongings are divided instantly. Your shoes, your knife, your cloak, all redistributed before the body cools. If no one wants them, they are buried with you or burned in the hearth. There is no inheritance, only redistribution of burden. If you owe debts, your family now owes them. If you owned anything of value, it will mysteriously vanish before the priest finishes his sermon. Morning is quiet. A woman might cry softly while shelling beans. A man might drink more than usual. A child might carry your walking stick around the yard trying to remember your face. But mostly life continues. The pigs still need feeding. The mud still needs shoveling. Your absence is a gap filled with chores, and your name is spoken less with each passing week until it returns to the wind and the dirt you never truly left. In medieval France, funerals are not closure. They are clean-up. They are cold hands, wet earth, and whispered prayers that drift away before the last clod hits the coffin. No one wears black. No one carves marble. No one writes poems. You die. You are buried. And the village exhales, not in relief, not in sadness, but in the tired rhythm of people too poor to mourn and too busy to stop. You're always hungry, not starving, not emaciated, just chronically, achingly, boringly underfed. Food in medieval France is not flavour, it is fuel. Barely. You don't eat to live well. You eat to not die immediately. Every meal is an exercise in stretching the bare minimum into the illusion of a feast, a slow negotiation with famine that you lose season by season. You know exactly how many peas are left in the jar. You know precisely which loaf went mouldy. You can feel your stomach flattening into something that used to have dreams and now just wants broth. Bread is the centre of everything, which is unfortunate because the bread hates you. It is hard. It is heavy. It is dense enough to qualify as structural material. Panis rusticus, the coarse bread of the poor, is made from rye, barley, millet, or whatever didn't rot that week. It is sour, flat, and baked in communal ovens alongside the despair of every family in town. If the baker is generous, it's crusty. If not, it's damp in the centre and hosts surprises. You slice it with a knife that also skins rabbits and trims your toenails. You dip it in anything liquid to soften it, because your teeth cannot be trusted. Porridge fills the gaps, grain boiled with water, maybe milk if you haven't traded it for candles. It is grey, warm, and clings to the inside of your mouth like guilt. Sometimes you add onions, sometimes dried herbs. If you're lucky, bacon grease. If you're rich, actual bacon. If you're poor, the memory of bacon from 3 winters ago when someone slaughtered a pig during a funeral, and no one asked whose it was. Meat is rare. You don't hunt. Poaching is a hanging offence. The forests belong to lords, not you. So you eat salted scraps, boiled bones, or organ meat that even the dogs refused. On feast days, maybe a goose. On weddings, maybe a hen. On your deathbed, someone might roast a rabbit in your honour, assuming you remembered to leave behind a clean shroud. Fish is seasonal. Eggs are occasional. Cheese is hard, sharp, and only slightly mouldy, which counts as flavour. Vegetables exist, but they are not the crisp, bright market goods of modern fantasy. They are turnips. Always turnips. Or leeks. Or beans. Things that grow in mud and taste like it. You eat them boiled, mashed or stewed with salt if you're blessed, with ashes if the fire got away from you again. Fruit is a summer miracle and a winter memory. Apples if the tree didn't rot. Berries if the birds didn't beat you to them. You dry what you can, steal what you can't, and pretend that fermented pears count as nutrition. You eat with your hands, plates are wood, bowls are shared, spoons are rare, knives are communal, napkins do not exist. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, your neighbour's sleeve, or the dog. You eat fast because food disappears. You eat quiet because someone else might ask for a share. You eat everything, the crusts, the burnt bits, the soup skin, the marrow, because throwing food away is heresy against hunger itself. Water is suspicious. It comes from the well, the stream, or the rain barrel. It is cloudy. It is gritty. It is occasionally alive. You drink ale instead, weak and sour and slightly safer. Children drink it. Elders drink it. You drink it and pretend it's refreshing, even though it tastes like a sheep washed its feet in it last week. Wine is for the priest, the merchant, or the noble. You sip it at weddings and funerals and imagine what life would be like if grapes loved the poor. In medieval France, food is not joy. It is a fight, a calculation, a prayer that the frost doesn't kill your beans, that the rats don't eat your grain, that the cow births without dying. It is a quiet meal by a smoky fire with people too tired to speak and too hungry to stop. You chew, you swallow, you wipe your face with the back of your hand, and you pray to the saints that tomorrow's pot will contain more than water, memory, and the taste of your own teeth. Holidays in medieval France are not joyful pauses from hardship. They're controlled explosions of forced cheer scheduled by the church and sanctioned by the people who want you briefly distracted but never truly happy. They come often, which sounds generous, until you realise each one is tethered to a list of rules longer than your field lease, and monitored by neighbours who measure your piety, by how little you smile. Celebrations are holy obligations disguised as merriment, and the price of skipping them is suspicion, social exile, or supernatural retribution. Sometimes all three, depending on the feast and how many chickens went missing that week. You begin the year with Epiphany, which you don't understand but participate in because someone once said, "Missing it brings plagues." Then comes Lent, which is not a celebration but an extended fast designed to remind you that your body is sinful, and butter is a tool of the devil. 40 days of grey soup, dry bread, and public guilt. Easter follows, technically a joyful occasion, but mostly remembered for its early mass, its bad weather, and the fact that someone always dies trying to light a new fire on the first attempt. Saint days dominate the calendar. Every village has a patron, every month has a martyr, and every third day someone walks through the square with a relic, a rattle, and a vague promise of divine favour. You kneel, you chant, you process behind a statue that wobbles like it wants to fall and crush you. You light candles you can't afford, you burn incense that makes your eyes water. You thank a saint you've never heard of for saving your cousin's pig from demonic flatulence. You don't ask questions. You just wave the herbs and pretend it matters. Weddings are technically private, but treated like military operations. You dress in your least lice-infested tunic. You bring bread, beer, or someone else's child to show goodwill. You dance to the same 3 songs played on 2 out-of-tune instruments. You drink ale until you forget whose cousin is marrying whom. The food is simple, the laughter is nervous, and the bride looks exhausted before the ceremony begins. The celebration ends with someone vomiting in the fire pit and someone else losing a shoe in the river. It is considered a great success. Harvest festivals are the closest thing to real fun. They happen only if the crops didn't fail, the weather didn't revolt, and the Lord didn't increase the grain tax that week. You roast what you shouldn't have slaughtered, you bake what you can't afford to waste, and you drink like the saints won't notice. There is dancing, there is shouting, there is kissing behind barns. Someone sings badly. Someone falls into a pile of manure. Someone ends up married. It is chaos, brief and glorious. Then you wake up sore, hoarse, and holding a turnip you don't remember stealing. Christmas is cold. There is no tree, no gifts, no carols. There is meat maybe if you save the goose, and wine if the priest shares. The fire is warm, the bread is fresh, and for a few hours you forget how close the rats have gotten to your bed. You tell stories, you pass the jug, you remember the dead with jokes and silence, and when the church bell rings, you go outside, bow your head, and try not to cry from the cold, or the memory of what last winter took. In medieval France, holidays are not escapes. They are sanctioned breathers from a life built on repetition and dread. You celebrate because you need to, because the world gives you so few moments of light that you cling to whatever flickers. You wear your best rags, you eat your finest crumbs, and you pretend, for an afternoon, for an evening, for a hymn, that joy might still be real, even if it's rationed like everything else. You are afraid. Always. Not of war or taxes or even hunger. Those are certainties. You fear the things that slip between cracks in reason, that whistle through chimneys, that brush your face in the night and vanish before you can scream. Superstition is not a supplement to religion. It is the backbone of your understanding of the world. Saints may save souls, but it's the whispers, charms, and talismans that save your cow from dropping dead, or your child from being stolen by a night wind that speaks Latin. You don't believe in magic because it's fun. You believe because not believing is too dangerous. Every illness is a curse, every accident is a sign. If someone falls from a ladder, it's because he looked at a black rooster during a waning moon. If your bread doesn't rise, someone nearby is consorting with demons. If your baby won't stop crying, someone has cursed your breast milk or left a changeling in the crib. You spit over your shoulder to undo bad luck. You tie red string around your wrist to keep your thoughts in. You sleep with iron under the bed, garlic in the rafters, and prayers carved into the doorframe, just in case God forgets which house is yours when death comes knocking. Witches are real, not in theory, in practice. They live at the edge of the woods, or in your neighbour's attic, or perhaps in your own family, disguised as a cousin with too much knowledge of herbs and not enough interest in men. You spot them by their eyes, by their moles, by their ability to heal too quickly or not die when they should. You accuse them when the crops rot, when the dog howls at dusk, when your dreams turn sour and your knees ache in patterns. Trials are rare. Punishments are quick. If she floats, she's guilty. If she sinks, she's pure, and also dead. Either way, justice is served, and the rain returns. Creatures lurk. The night is not empty. It holds things that scratch at the shutters and snort through the keyhole. Wolves, yes, but also worse. The devil, sometimes in the form of a man, sometimes a pig, always watching. Fairies who lure children into ponds, spirits who sit on your chest while you sleep. A headless woman who counts your chickens and then curses your bloodline. You leave offerings, bread, salt, bits of cloth, at crossroads, on windowsills, beneath trees that look too old to be trusted. You whisper apologies to things you can't name. You never walk home alone after sunset, unless you've already made peace with the concept of being dragged into the brambles and never seen again. The priest says these fears are nonsense, but he still carries relics and won't walk past the graveyard without muttering something in Latin. The midwife hums songs older than scripture while tying charms to the ankles of newborns. The blacksmith sharpens his tools with prayers. The baker swears that adding rosemary to his dough keeps his soul safe. You know better than to mock them. The last person who laughed at omens lost his voice during a storm and now speaks in tongues whenever he sees a dead bird. In medieval France, fear is not paranoia. It is prudence. It is ritual. It is the mortar between the stones of your understanding. You wear it like a cloak, stitched with the names of saints, soaked in old blood, patched with talismans made of teeth and twine. You're afraid because there is so much to fear, not just death, but everything that dances around it, wearing the masks of sickness, madness, misfortune, and silence. And when you light a candle, it is not for light. It is to keep the shadows from speaking. You are a farmer, not by choice, not by tradition, but because there is no alternative. You do not farm for profit. You do not farm for pride. You farm because the earth is the only thing in your life more stubborn than you are, and because it has been decided long before you were born that your hands will break so someone else's table can stay full. Farming is not a profession. It is a sentence with no end date, no parole, and a dress code that includes mud in places you forgot could get muddy. The soil is not your friend. It is clay, rock, sludge, or dust, depending on the month, the rain, and how badly the last oxen died. You till it with tools made from splinters and willpower. A wooden plough, a rusted hook, a bent hoe with a handle you've rewrapped 12 times with rope and hope. Your ox is tired. You are tired. The sun is not rising. It's glaring. You start before it does, and keep going long after it dips behind the trees, which you hate because they drop leaves into your irrigation ditch and feed the crows that eat your seed. You plant grain. Wheat if you're lucky. Rye if you're not. Barley when everything else fails. It never looks promising, and by harvest time, you'll swear the weeds are winning. You pray to saints for rain, then beg them to stop when the floods come. You watch clouds like a dying man watches a closed door, waiting to see if the gods are merciful or bored. You know the signs of blight, of mildew, of worms and drought and rot. You know that one bad week in May can undo 8 months of labour and 3 generations of bloodline. Harvest is a frantic panic. Everything must come up before the mould, the frost, the birds, the tax collector. You cut grain with a blade that once belonged to your grandfather and still has a notch from when he used it in a tavern fight. You bind sheaves until your hands blister. You stack them in barns that leak, guarded by cats that are lazy and boys who are hungover. Every bag you carry reminds you that your back is mortal. Every bushel counted reminds you that your debt is not. You do not eat most of what you grow. The best grain goes to your Lord, the next portion to the church, then the miller, then the rats. Then, if nothing goes wrong, and something always does, you keep enough to make bread thin enough to see through and porridge thick enough to dull the ache of not having meat. Your vegetables are what didn't die. Your fruit is whatever didn't ferment. Your livestock is technically alive, though most of it seems resentful about the fact. Winter is always coming. You store what you can. You dry, salt, smoke, bury, and hope. You line your walls with sacks of beans and stacks of firewood you know won't last. You count cabbages like they're coins. You guard carrots like they're gold. You sleep beside potatoes. They are your security, your comfort, and your inheritance. If they freeze, so do you. If they rot, so does your family. In medieval France, farming is not noble. It is not romantic. It is a daily war waged with a spoon and a prayer, against the elements, the pests, the calendar, and your own collapsing body. You do it because you must, because the land takes as much as it gives, because no one else will, and because if you ever stopped, the world, or at least your corner of it, would starve, grumble, and forget your name by the next planting season. You are taxed, constantly, mercilessly, inventively. In medieval France, taxes are not a system. They are a lifestyle, a philosophy, a quiet form of theft that wears a cross and a crown and never forgets where you live. You are taxed on your grain, your sheep, your wine, your land, your windows, your pigs, your oven, your right to marry, your right to die, and your right to be left alone, which you never are. You're taxed when it rains because the crops might grow, and you are taxed when it doesn't because the crops might not. There is no winning, only surviving, and even that is frowned upon if you do it too loudly. Your lord takes the first share. He calls it duty. You call it robbery. He arrives with men on horseback, all clean boots and polished beards, and takes the best of your grain, the fattest of your chickens, and occasionally your cart if he likes the wheels. He does not thank you. He nods, as if he's doing you a favour by not taking the roof as well. Then comes the church, the tithe, 10% in theory, 20% in practice. The priest does not carry a sword, but he carries something heavier, eternal damnation should you forget to fork over the cheese. He blesses your barn, counts your cows, and warns you that Saint Blaise once smote a man who lied about his lentils. The miller takes his cut too. You cannot grind your own grain. That would be theft. Of what? Of possibility. So you bring your sack to his mill and watch him scoop out a portion with hands that move too quickly to measure. He smiles. He reminds you of the regulations. You nod. You walk home lighter. Then the bailiff visits, just to make sure the lord and the priest and the miller didn't miss anything. He counts your chickens again. They seem smaller than last year. He shrugs. He takes one anyway. And then there are the special taxes, war taxes, road taxes, bridge taxes, even if you live nowhere near a bridge, market taxes for selling, storage taxes for not selling, hearth taxes for having a fire, chimney taxes for having smoke. There is a tax on salt, which means there is a black market for salt, which means there is a fine for being caught with salt you didn't suffer for. And yes, there is a tax collector for every one of these, each with different rules, fees and boots, muddy from stealing from someone poorer than you an hour earlier. If you can't pay, you owe labour. Days spent fixing the Lord's road, hours spent carrying stones for the church, weeks spent guarding fields you don't own from people just as hungry as you are. If you refuse, you're fined. If you flee, you are hunted. If you complain, you are punished. If you die, your family still owes. The debt doesn't die with you. It reproduces like rats in legal language you'll never understand. You keep records, on scraps, in charcoal, on the inside of your memory, worn smooth from worry. You mark what you've given, what they took, what they promised not to take again and did anyway. You do the math. It doesn't work. It never works. By harvest's end, your barn is half full, your children are half fed, your soul is half broken, and someone is knocking at the door with a smile and a sack, ready to make it all worse again. In medieval France, taxes are not about revenue. They are about reminding you who owns you. The answer is everyone. The state, the church, the land, the wind. All of them want to share. You give because there's no other option. You give because to refuse is to disappear. You give and then you bow and then you pray you gave enough. You didn't. You never do. You're not educated. That's not an insult, that's a fact. In medieval France, education is a luxury reserved for boys with rich fathers, monastic ambitions, or extremely patient bishops. You're probably none of those things. You cannot read, you cannot write, you can barely count past 20, and only if you're allowed to use your toes. Your knowledge comes from repetition, superstition, and the occasional piece of advice shouted over a pig pen. Wisdom is passed down orally, like soup recipes or warnings about poisonous mushrooms, and often contains more guesswork than truth. If you are a peasant, school does not exist for you. Your classroom is the field, the forge, the kitchen, or the stable. Your teachers are your parents, your neighbours, and your own mistakes. You learn which weeds kill sheep, how to tie knots that won't slip, and how to keep rats out of the grain without offending the local saint who allegedly protects rodents. You learn fast or you learn nothing. There is no curriculum, only survival. If, by some miracle, you are sent to school, it means you are a boy, not needed on the farm, and someone has decided you might be useful to God. You walk miles to a monastery where monks teach you Latin you don't understand and don't question. The classroom is cold, the bench is splinters, the ink smells like vinegar and regret. The lessons are long, slow, and mostly religious. You copy scripture onto parchment you'll never own. You recite prayers to saints you fear. You memorize texts in a language no one speaks. If you ask questions, you are corrected. If you fall asleep, you are beaten. Discipline is not metaphorical. The rod is literal. The punishments are swift. A slap for a wrong vowel, a beating for a crooked line, a full day's fasting if you dare to smirk during a psalm. The goal is not understanding. It is obedience. You don't learn to think. You learn to replicate. You do not explore ideas. You endure them. Education is less about knowledge and more about moulding. Into what? That depends. A clerk, a priest, a scribe, a man who writes lists for men who own lists. Girls do not go to school unless they are nuns or extremely unfortunate or both. They are taught to sew, pray, churn butter, and die without causing a fuss. If a girl can read, people ask uncomfortable questions. If she can write, they ask dangerous ones. A literate woman is either a saint or a threat, sometimes both, depending on whether her brother is alive to vouch for her purity. Most girls memorize hymns and herb lore, then get married and forget everything except how to boil cabbage and count rosary beads without moving their lips. Books are rare. One book equals one cow, sometimes two. You don't own books, you hear them. You see them held by men with clean hands and power in their voices. If you are lucky, you might glimpse an illustrated manuscript. Bright colours, curling letters, saints with gold halos and dead eyes. You do not touch it. You do not ask for another look. You return to your chores and pretend you didn't feel something stir in your ribs when you saw St. Michael stabbing the devil on a horse made of ink. In medieval France, education is not a birthright. It is a gamble, a path lined with bruises, boredom, and the ever-present threat of eternal damnation if you spell Dominus incorrectly. Most people die as ignorant as they were born, and no one blames them. What matters is that you know how to work, how to kneel, and how to answer Amen when someone in a robe demands it. You do not learn to read the world, you learn to survive it, which ironically is the only lesson that sticks. You are born into noise. The clatter of livestock, the rattle of dishes, the muttering of prayers, the crying of other children, all of it layered over the heavy breathing of exhausted adults who look at you not with joy, but with the quiet calculation of whether you'll survive long enough to justify the effort. Childhood in medieval France is not innocent. It is not protected. It is not long. It is a brief, dirty sprint through mud, blood, fire, superstition, and illness. A race you're expected to lose gracefully by your 5th birthday. If you live past 10, people start to act surprised. If you live past 15, they put you to work. Infancy is constant peril. You're swaddled in rough cloth, kept near the hearth to avoid frost, and watched over by a mother who hasn't slept since your older sibling died from a cough. If you cry too much, you're cursed. If you don't cry enough, you're dying. Teething is a spiritual crisis. Diarrhea is an omen. Every fever is a battle between God and something dark in the corner of the room that everyone pretends not to see. You are anointed, prayed over, and sometimes forgotten under a blanket while someone chases a runaway goat. Your name is given quickly, your baptism done faster. Not because they're excited, but because too many have died without one. By age 3, you are expected to help. You carry wood, you hold chickens, you shoo pigs from the doorway and sweep the same dirt that falls from your own boots. By age 5, you can be left alone with a smaller sibling and told not to let it die. By age 7, you know how to spin, how to stir, how to lie when someone asks if you've seen the priest's missing apples. You sleep beside your family on a shared straw mattress that smells of smoke, milk, sweat, and something no one ever identifies. You wake when they wake. You sleep when they allow it. There is no play. There is distraction. A stick becomes a sword until it breaks or someone's eye bleeds. A hoop becomes a game until someone steals it. Laughter is suspicious unless supervised. Toys are rare, breakable, and often edible. Dolls are made of rags. Balls are made of leather and poor decisions. Most entertainment is watching the adults argue or the animals mate. You learn quickly to be quiet when they're drunk and to disappear when they're sad. Education is accidental. You learn by imitation, repetition, and pain. You are corrected with slaps, with shouts, with long silences that freeze deeper than winter. You are praised with scraps, with nods, with survival. You learn that fire is hot because you touched it. You learn not to speak during Mass because you were dragged out by the ear and reminded with a switch. You memorize which mushrooms kill and which ones merely make you vomit. You do not ask questions. You absorb the answers through bruises and glances. You are raised communally. Your mother is tired. Your father is distant. Your siblings are competitors. The village watches you, shapes you, disciplines you, gossips about you. If you stumble, you are helped up. If you speak out of turn, you're reminded to know your place. That place is low, always low. The only ladder is obedience, and the rungs are greased with fear. You are taught that virtue means silence, that faith means hunger, and that growing up is not a journey. It is an erosion. In medieval France, childhood is not a golden age. It is a proving ground, a waiting room for labour or the grave, whichever comes first. You are not cherished. You are tolerated. You are not nurtured. You are prepared. For work, for pain, for a life spent beneath someone else's boot. And if by some twist of fate you make it to adulthood with most of your limbs and half your hope intact, no one claps, no one celebrates. They just hand you a shovel and point to the field. Because now it's your turn to raise the next one. And maybe, just maybe, they'll last longer than you did. But probably not.